Welcome to the first full episode of my video series documenting the creation of my Concerto for Wind Ensemble. Now in this first episode, I originally planned to talk about the overall work and how I see the five movement structure, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be five movements. I was going to talk about how that was going to unfold and what I see for each movement. However, in the month since the first video, I've actually written a lot more music than I anticipated, and have basically completed movement 2. So I thought instead I would just dive in and talk about this movement, and we'll come back to the overall structure of the piece a little bit later. So the instrumentation, first of all, for this movement is fairly small. There's the 5 flutes, 3 of which are antiphonal, 6 clarinets, 3 of which are also out around the audience. 5 of the 6 trumpets are used in this movement, including the 3 that are around the audience. Harp, vibraphone, saxophones, trombones, and a crystal water glass. So that's not a very big instrumentation. In fact, the movement never really gets much above mezzo piano, though it does have one big, really warm moment where it blossoms around the audience. And in fact, it's sort of a progression, beginning with only instruments on stage, and then at this large moment when G major happens, because we're mostly in an F-sharp tonality throughout the movement, it keeps hinting at G major, and we finally just arrive at this really warm, lush G major. The instruments spread around and the sound blossoms around the audience. And then it ends with only the antiphonal instruments. Now there are 2 central motives that I use in this piece. The first that opens the work and reappears a couple of times, but I derived a second one from this, and the second one is what I use extensively. When I compose, I usually build the work out of as small amount of material as possible. Francis Macbeth called this economy of materials, and it's very central to the way I think of music and way I organize music. And so the entire work, the entire movement is built from that singular motive, as you'll hear. So now I want to show you a little bit of how I work in Digital Performer, the sequencing program, and give you a little behind the scenes of a couple of snippets of the music. So this is Digital Performer, my favorite sequencing software and what I've been using to compose for many years. I find it faster than pencil and paper, though sometimes I still do sketch out ideas with pencil and paper. And it's definitely a lot less constrictive than trying to compose in Finale or Sibelius, because in those you have to decide on the meter changes and the bar lines as you go, and I don't like to do that until I'm completely finished with the music. I want it to be fluid and not worry about what it looks like on the page. That's the last step, not the first. Anyway, what you see here is a bird's eye view of all of Movement 2 from the Concerto for Wind Ensemble. These colors represent the various instruments, and as you might guess, the vertical arrangement is the pitch level. So this note right here, for example, is middle C. Everything above it would be above middle C, and likewise everything below would be in the lower register. These green and brown notes here at the beginning, that's a flute duet that opens the entire movement, and then I bring in some more instruments, for instance the clarinets and some trombones, and these little green notes here are the harp. So it gets fairly dense here, but these instruments are all flutes, clarinets, oboes, harp, and vibraphone. So even though it looks like a lot's going on, it still has a really light, airy texture to it. And then we have this long solo here in the middle, and that blue represents alto flute, which is in fact behind the audience. And this is the first time one of the antiphonal instruments enters in this movement. All these greens and yellows and oranges are basically instruments that are on stage, and in this movement I've represented instruments off stage or behind the audience and around the audience in these blues and reds and pinks. So you can see the movement progresses from all on-stage music, then followed by an off-stage, the flute solo, and then sort of interaction between the two, but the balance of power, so to speak, has shifted by the end, and we're entirely off-stage or out around the audience. None of the instruments on stage are playing anymore. So now I'll play you a little bit. I'm hesitant to do this, one, because MIDI generally sounds like crap, and even when the sounds are of high quality, it's almost worse because it can fool you into thinking that it's accurate, and you can actually stop listening actively. The sounds I'm using here are really not too bad, but I don't do a lot of extra tweaking or really try to make it sound as real as possible. One, it just takes a lot of extra time, and two, again, it can fool me into being complacent, and I don't want to do that. I'm also hesitant just to show you a work in progress. I think every composer would feel that way, but that's what this whole video series is about. So I'll start with the end of this flute duet that opens the movement. So these two green ones down here are trombones with very slow wah, harmony mute. And out of that comes two clarinets. So you can see I'm flirting with this oscillation between an F sharp tonality and a G major tonality. Ultimately, it comes back down to F sharp and winds itself out to this flute solo here. But the G major is in fact foreshadowing, because down here in this section, which you can tell by its density is what would be the climax section, we finally fully arrive at G major and embrace it. And that's the moment that the music really spreads from on stage and blossoms around the audience. I'll play a little bit of that for you. So you can't tell from this recording, but those flutes and the green and red down here, those clarinets, those are all antiphonal instruments surrounding the audience. As I mentioned, everything from here to the end is only antiphonal. There's nothing on stage playing. So that's a rough overview of movement 2. I expect it will change some more. It's not really finished, but as you can see, there's music beginning to end, and the overall shape and character of the piece is there. There's a few moments I need to go back and fix, but like I said, I will come back and do that later after I've had a little break from this movement. I'm going to move on to movement 3, which I anticipate will be extremely fast, extremely virtuosic, but also extremely quiet almost the entire time. Usually I think of fast and loud going together, so I thought I would try to turn that on its head and have it fast and soft, but still very intense and relentless. Or I might jump to the 5th movement, but a little bit more about those other movements in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.